For decades, people wondered what Judi Dench and Maggie Smith really were to each other. Were they friends? Rivals? Both? From the outside, their relationship could look almost impossible to define. They shared dressing rooms, traded jokes, stole scenes, and spent more than half a century working in the same demanding world. They teased each other like sisters and competed like two people who knew exactly how talented the other was. But when Maggie Smith died, something changed. Judi's grief revealed what all the rumors had missed. Their rivalry was never the opposite of their friendship. It was part of it. And beneath the sharp jokes was something much deeper, two women who understood each other better than almost anyone else could. Judi and Maggie never had the kind of friendship that needed constant declarations of affection. They were not sentimental people. Their language was wit. A raised eyebrow. A perfectly timed insult. A correction delivered with a smile. They could make each other laugh because they knew each other's weak spots. They also knew how far they could push without causing real damage. That is what old friends do. They learn where the bruises are, and somehow know exactly how hard to press. But audiences often saw something else. They saw two legendary actresses from the same generation and naturally turned their friendship into a competition. Who was better? Who was funnier? Who had more range? Who got the better roles? Who stole the scene? Who was asked first? Those questions followed them for years because, in some ways, the comparison was unavoidable. They were born only weeks apart. They came up through British theatre around the same time. They became dames. They won Oscars. They became national treasures. And they both reached the rare position where audiences knew their names before they even knew the character they were playing. So yes, there was competition. But here's where the story gets interesting. Competition did not destroy their friendship. It helped shape it. When Judi Dench and Maggie Smith were young actresses, they were not icons. There were no global franchises waiting for them. No endless interviews celebrating their careers. They were working performers trying to survive in an industry that could be unforgiving, especially toward women. They learned early that talent alone did not guarantee opportunity. Age mattered. Appearance mattered. Timing mattered. The role someone else received could easily have been the role you wanted. The Old Vic became part of their shared history. Maggie later remembered sharing a dressing room with Judi and joked that Judi was the ingenue while she was not. It was funny, but there was something real underneath it. The theater world had already started placing women into categories. One actress was the young leading woman. Another was expected to play something else. Before either of them became famous, the industry was already deciding how much space they were allowed to occupy. And when two extraordinary actresses rise at the same time, people compare them. It is almost inevitable. The public turns admiration into a contest. But Judi and Maggie understood that game because they had lived it. They knew that when someone beside you is brilliant, you have a choice. You can feel threatened by them, or you can let their brilliance push you to become better. They chose the second path. That is why Judi's grief after Maggie's death mattered so much. She was not mourning a distant colleague. She was mourning someone who had been part of her professional life for almost a lifetime. Maggie had seen Judi before the fame, before the major film roles, before the world turned her into a national treasure. Judi had seen Maggie before Harry Potter and Downton Abbey made her familiar to millions of younger viewers. And that means Judi knew something the public could never fully know. Maggie Smith was never simply the sharp-tongued old woman audiences came to adore. Yes, she could destroy someone with a single sentence. Yes, she could make one raised eyebrow feel like a legal judgment. She could enter a scene, say almost nothing, and somehow make everyone else seem to be moving too slowly. But that image was only one small piece of her. By the time younger generations discovered her as Professor McGonagall or Violet Crawley, Maggie had already spent decades proving what she could do. She had worked on stage beside some of the greatest performers of her generation. She had played Shakespeare. She had worked in comedy, drama, film, television, and theater. She had won an Academy Award for the prime of Miss Jean Brodie and another for California Suite. She had moved from serious drama to absurd comedy and back again without ever becoming trapped in one kind of role. That range is important because Maggie never really fit the image people created for her. She could be funny, but she was not merely a comedian. She could be severe, but she was not cold. She could be intimidating, but there was enormous vulnerability underneath that control. She often hid that vulnerability so well that audiences forgot it was there. And perhaps Judi understood that better than most. Maggie's private life had also demanded a great deal from her. Her first marriage to actor Robert Stevens became deeply troubled, with problems involving alcohol, mental health, and infidelity placing enormous pressure on their family. Maggie continued working while raising her sons, carrying responsibilities that the public rarely saw. Eventually, the marriage ended. Later, she married playwright Beverly Cross, who became a steady presence in her life until his death. After losing him, Maggie never remarried. That loss mattered. Maggie remained private, but private does not mean untouched. She knew disappointment. She knew loneliness. She knew what it meant to keep going while carrying pain that other people could not see. And Judi knew something about that kind of loss too. Judi's husband, Michael Williams, died in 2001. Over the years, she spoke about grief in a way that suggested sorrow does not simply disappear. Sometimes it changes shape. Sometimes it becomes part of the energy that keeps you moving. That makes what happened after Maggie's death even more powerful. Because when Judi broke down, it was not simply one famous actress mourning another famous actress. It was grief recognizing grief. Two women had spent their lives turning emotion, disappointment, fear, and pain into performances. They had learned how to keep going. They had learned how to walk onto a stage even when life outside it was difficult. And now one of them was gone. So what exactly were the rumors Judi finally revealed? The answer is much less scandalous than people might expect. There was no secret feud waiting to be exposed. No dramatic betrayal. No hidden hatred. The real rumor was that Judi Dench and Maggie Smith were rivals. And the strange thing is, that rumor was partly true. They were rivals. But not the kind of rivals people imagined. They were rivals because they belonged to the same rare group of actresses who could command almost any room they entered. There are only so many women in one generation who can move comfortably between Shakespeare, comedy, film, television, and serious drama. There are only so many performers who can become both critical favorites and household names. And there are only so many great roles for older women. Judi and Maggie knew that. Maggie could joke that Judi was always asked first. Judi could laugh because the joke was funny, but also because there was a little truth inside it. That is the kind of joke that only works between people who trust each other. From a stranger, it could sound bitter. From Maggie, it became affection sharpened into a blade. That tells us something important about their friendship. They did not need to pretend competition did not exist. They did not need to pretend ambition was harmless. They could admit that the business was competitive because they knew it was. Acting is not as gentle as audiences sometimes imagine. Behind every role is another performer who did not get it. Behind every award is someone else watching and wondering what might have been. Behind every glowing review is an actor asking whether their best work has already happened. And for women, especially as they grew older, the pressure could become even harsher. Judi and Maggie watched each other survive all of it. That may have been the deepest bond between them. They were witnesses to each other's ambition, insecurity, success, disappointment, aging, and survival. They understood what the other had paid to stay in the profession. That is a very different kind of friendship from the soft, sentimental version people often expect. Their friendship was powerful precisely because it had room for rivalry. Think about how easily their story could have been turned into something else. Two famous actresses from the same generation. One gets the bigger role. The other feels jealous. One receives more attention. The other becomes resentful. Eventually, the friendship collapses. That is the version audiences often prefer because it is simple. Women competing becomes drama. Women admiring each other while still pushing themselves to be excellent is much harder to turn into a scandal. Judi and Maggie lived in that complicated middle ground. They could compete and still care about each other. They could tease each other without trying to destroy each other. They could be annoyed with each other and still remain friends. They understood that another woman's success did not have to erase their own. Years later, audiences got to see some of that ease in Nothing Like a Dame, alongside Joan Plowright and Eileen Atkins. The four women could sit together and talk about work, age, memory, illness, casting, and death with a kind of honesty that comes only after decades in the same profession. They were not trying to look young. They were not pretending time had not changed them. They were laughing at the absurdity of getting older while refusing to disappear. And that became one of the most important things about Judi and Maggie's careers. They helped prove that a woman's acting life did not have to end when youth ended. Maggie's later fame sometimes hides just how long she had already been working. For younger audiences, she arrived through Harry Potter and Downton Abbey. But those roles were chapters near the end of a huge career, not the beginning. The same is true of Judi. Many people first knew her through James Bond as M. But by then, she had already built an extraordinary theatre career and become one of Britain's most respected performers. The theatre shaped both women. On stage, there is nowhere to hide. There is no editing. No second take. No camera angle to save a weak moment. You stand in front of an audience and make the scene work. If something goes wrong, you keep going. If another actor gives you something unexpected, you respond. If the audience is cold, you find a way to warm the room. Maggie understood that discipline. Judi did too. It explains their timing. It explains their ability to steal a scene without looking as though they were trying. They knew when to speak and, just as importantly, when not to speak. They understood that a pause could sometimes be more powerful than a speech. But there was another thing they shared. They knew what it meant to age in public. For many actresses of their generation, getting older meant fewer opportunities. Roles became smaller. Characters became softer. Women were often pushed toward the edges of stories. Youth was treated as exciting, while age was treated as something to hide. Judi and Maggie did something different. They turned age into authority. Maggie's Violet Crawley worked because Maggie brought decades of experience into every look and every line. The character did not need to explain why she had authority. You believed it because Maggie carried that history with her. Professor McGonagall worked for the same reason. She felt like someone who had watched generations of foolishness come and go and had no intention of wasting time on any more of it. Judi did something similar as M in the James Bond films. She was not there simply to add glamour. She brought authority. She could deliver disappointment, affection, danger, and command in the same sentence. Her age did not weaken the character. It made her more formidable. Together, they helped change the image of what an older actress could be.